Morning in Maine has a quiet kind of beauty, the kind that makes your heart ache a little. I'm Eleanor Price, 68 years old, and I've lived my whole life here, in this little white wooden house by the sea. Every morning I wake to the cry of gulls and the smell of salt in the air. I make a cup of mint tea, listen to the ticking clock, and let the day ease into motion. I've always believed that when you begin the morning in peace, the rest of the day follows gently. That morning felt the same, until the phone rang. On the screen, Melissa, my only daughter. I smiled, thinking she might be calling to ask for my creamy salmon stew recipe again, but her voice wasn't warm this time. "Mom," she said flatly, "we're leaving tomorrow." I froze. The spoon slipped from my fingers, clinking against the cup. "Leaving? Where to, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Silence. Then her next words fell like a stone into still water. "To Europe, and I sold the beach house." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "The house by the shore, Mom. I sold it. It's done." I could hear the sound of a suitcase zipping, a door slamming. Then Melissa added softly, "It's better this way. You don't need that old place anymore. You'll thank me later." Click. The call ended. The kitchen went silent. Only the clock kept ticking, and the mint tea grew cold. Outside, the wind slipped through the cracks of the old door, carrying in the sharp breath of the sea. I stood there, trembling slightly, staring out the window. The sky was heavy and gray, clouds hanging low over the town like a thick blanket. I whispered, almost to myself, "You just sold your father's memories, Melissa." I walked to the fireplace. The photo of Richard, my late husband, still sat on the mantel. He was smiling, in that picture-soft, kind eyes that had always followed me through life. This house was his legacy. He built it board by board, numbered every frame, chose every honey-colored brick. Every corner carried his touch, and the echo of the afternoons when the three of us sat listening to the waves. I brushed my fingers against the photo, afraid to scratch the memory. "You see, Richard? What you feared has happened. When he died 6 months ago, I thought nothing could hurt more. But it turns out the deepest pain doesn't come from death. It comes from the living, when they choose to forget love." I didn't cry. I just breathed in, feeling the cold, hollow space inside my chest. Real loss isn't loud. It empties you quietly. I sat down. Beneath the lace tablecloth, in a small drawer, lay a cream-colored envelope. Richard gave it to me 3 days before he passed. "Ellie," he said, "when you feel like you've lost everything, open this." Not before. I'd kept it sealed for half a year. But this morning, after Melissa said those words, I knew. It was time. I picked it up. The paper had yellowed, his handwriting tilted slightly to the right. "For Ellie, when the time comes." Each letter was steady, warm, just like his voice when he read aloud at night. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wanted one more moment, to breathe in the ocean air, to remember Richard's laugh, and to understand a new chapter was coming, even if I didn't know where it would lead. Outside, light rain tapped the wooden roof. A seagull landed on the railing, tilting its head at me with curious, glassy eyes. I smiled faintly. "You came to see if I'll open it, huh?" I set the envelope on the table and poured another cup of tea. Steam rose like a thread connecting past and present. In my mind, I could almost hear Richard's voice. "I've always believed, Ellie, waves may pull back, but the tide always returns." I smiled. My voice cracked as I whispered, "And now, I'll wait for mine." That afternoon, the rain still hadn't stopped. Maine in this season always feels that way-steady rain that never quite ends, as if the sky itself has sadness it can't put into words. I sat by the window watching raindrops trace long silver trails down the glass. In the corner, the old record player sat silent. The needle had broken last year, and I'd never fixed it. The only sound left in the house was the rain, and my own breathing. Across from me hung the family photo Richard had once put up himself. It was from the summer of 1998, when Melissa was 8. I wore a white dress, my hair braided in two. Richard's smile was wide, one hand resting proudly on our daughter's shoulder. The three of us stood in front of this very house, wrapped in sunlight and ocean breeze. I remember that day so clearly, the day Richard told me he wanted this to be our forever home. "I don't need much, Ellie," he'd said, painting the wooden steps. "Just you, our girl, and the sound of the sea." Back then, I laughed. I believed our world would stay that small and perfect forever. I walked over to the picture and brushed a thin layer of dust off the frame. For a split second, my reflection stared back at me. An older woman, tired eyes, but still holding the faint light of a love that once filled everything. "You always said this would be the place she'd come back to," I whispered. "But now she's the one who left first." I turned back to the table. The envelope was still there, untouched. I didn't have the courage to open it yet. Instead, I pulled out an old notebook from the drawer, the one Richard and I used to jot down little pieces of our life together. The paper had yellowed, the ink smelled faintly of age. I flipped a few pages and found a line he'd written one winter, 3 years ago. "If one day I'm not around, remember, loneliness can be a very good teacher." I pressed my lips together, fighting the emotion that rose up. His words were always simple, but they never missed their mark. Richard never treated death like something to fear. He said that when we love a place deeply enough, our souls linger there to guard it. Maybe that's why I never left this house. A soft knock startled me. It was rare for anyone to visit in weather like this. When I opened the door, I found Maggie, my neighbor 3 houses down, standing there in a soaked raincoat. "Eleanor," she said hoarsely, "I heard. Is it true? Melissa really sold the house?" I nodded, forcing a faint smile. "That's what she said, Maggie. I still don't know what to do." She stepped inside and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Ellie. I know how much you love this place. Richard always said he wanted you to stay here forever." I looked around the room, every corner so familiar it hurt. "Maybe I believed too much," I said quietly. "I thought love was a strong enough thread to keep her close. But I guess when people grow up, they reach for different threads, thinner ones, shinier ones." Maggie squeezed my hand. "Maybe she's just lost her way for a while." I smiled sadly. I'd like to believe that. But she didn't sell this house just for the money. There's something deeper. Anger, fear. Something I still don't understand. Maggie hesitated, then said, "Eleanor, do you remember when Richard asked me to keep some financial documents about the house? He said if anything ever happened, you should take a look." I blinked. "Documents? What kind?" She nodded. "A sealed envelope. I still have it. He gave it to me before he went into the hospital." My heartbeat quickened. Richard was always careful. He never did anything without a reason. "Could you bring it to me, Maggie?" "Of course. I'll be right back. 10 minutes. When the door closed, the house fell silent again. I looked at Richard's envelope on the table, then out the window. The rain had softened, just a few drops sliding lazily down the glass. A strange feeling crept in, half fear, half hope. I remembered that last night in the hospital. Richard had held my hand, eyes still bright though his body was fading. "Ellie," he whispered, I can't promise our daughter will understand all the love we gave her, but I promise, one day, you'll know why things happened the way they did. Back then, I thought he was delirious, but now, those words echoed through the quiet house like they'd been waiting all along. Outside, the wind sighed through the pine trees. I closed my eyes, letting my heartbeat fall in rhythm with it. Sometimes, life doesn't break all at once. It cracks slowly, quietly, over years. Maybe Richard saw those cracks before I did. When Maggie returned, she handed me a brown envelope, carefully sealed. My name was written on it in Richard's handwriting, dated March 12th, 2024. My hands trembled as I took it. It felt like holding a piece of the past. "Thank you, Maggie," I whispered, my voice tight. Maybe it's time I finally knew the truth. She nodded gently. "I'll leave you to it, but Eleanor, remember, sometimes the truth isn't meant to hurt us. It's meant to set us free." I smiled faintly. I hope this is one of those times. When she left, I stood staring at the two envelopes on the table. Two pieces of the same man. Two secrets, waiting to meet. I set them side by side on the wooden surface. A breeze slipped through the crack in the door, making the envelopes flutter softly, as if they were whispering to each other. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I could see Richard's gentle smile, warm as firelight, and somewhere, beneath the sound of the waves, I heard his voice again. "Begin, Ellie." "Don't be afraid." I sat quietly, staring at the two envelopes lying side by side on the wooden table, feeling as though they were watching me, waiting for me to choose. One was cream-colored, the one Richard had given me himself. The other was brown, the one Maggie had just brought. Different shades, but both carried the imprint of the same man, and the silence of someone gone. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only mist wrapping the garden in pale gray. After the rain, Maine always smells of damp earth and pine, a scent that pulls every summer memory back to life. Richard once said that the rain in Maine was the sea's memories falling to the ground. And maybe tonight those memories were asking me to open a door I'd kept closed too long. My hands trembled as I reached for the brown envelope first. Inside were a few neatly folded papers, financial documents, a copy of the house deed, and a short letter. Richard's handwriting was still the same, slightly slanted, slow and deliberate, like a man walking carefully through his thoughts. "Ellie, if you're reading this, it means things have changed. I don't know if you're still in the house or not, but I need you to know the beach house isn't just property. It's a part of me, of you, and of our daughter. I filed a separate ownership clause, ensuring that the house can only be sold if all 3 family members agree. If anything ever goes wrong, find my lawyer, Jonathan Wells, in Portland." I read each line slowly, feeling my pulse climb. Richard, always the planner. He had even thought of this, that the house might one day be taken away. But how then? How could Melissa have sold it? I folded the papers, took a deep breath, trying to calm the dizziness rising inside me. The cream envelope was still there on the table, waiting patiently. I opened it. Inside was just a single thin piece of paper, folded once. No documents, no money. Just a few lines written in Richard's familiar blue ink. "My Ellie, if you're reading this, it means you've reached the crossroads between memory and the present. Don't be afraid of losing what you love. Maybe it isn't loss. It's life asking you to find yourself again. When everything feels like it's falling apart, go to the red house at the end of the bay. The person there will tell you the rest of the story." I set the paper down, my heart thundering. The red house? At the end of the bay? I closed my eyes, trying to picture it. At the end of the bay, there were a few old fishermen's houses, most of them abandoned now. But yes, there was one red house. It used to be an old boat workshop. Richard had taken me there once, long ago. Why would he mention that place? And who was the person he wanted me to find? A wave of fear and curiosity rose inside me, crashing together. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, heavy. Maybe I shouldn't go, I thought. Maybe I should just stay. But then, softly, from somewhere deep inside me, I heard it again. Richard's voice. Begin, Ellie. Don't be afraid. That voice, steady and calm, like the sea at dusk. I knew, even if he was gone, he was still guiding me. I stood up, slipped on my thick coat, and tucked both envelopes into my bag. Outside, the clouds had parted, revealing a sky washed silver and violet, the soft light of a Maine autumn evening. The road to the bay wound downward through the pine forest. I drove slowly, the tires crunching over wet gravel, the sound rhythmic like time itself, ticking forward. The wind carried the scent of salt and of memory. On the radio, an old jazz record was still in the player, Misty by Errol Garner, Richard's favorite. I let it play. The melody was smooth as silk, tender and lonely. Part of me wanted to stop, to turn back, to pretend I'd never opened those envelopes. But another part of me, stronger, urged me on, as if fate itself had taken the wheel. When I turned onto the narrow road at the edge of the bay, I saw it. The red house. Its wooden walls were weathered, the windows veiled in moss, but a single light glowed inside, soft and golden. Thin smoke curled from the chimney, dissolving into the evening mist. I parked the car and stepped out. The air bit cold against my skin. Each step on the stone path crunched, echoing in the stillness. Before I could knock, the door opened. A man stood there, mid-50s, tall, gray-streaked hair, eyes calm yet strangely familiar. "Are you Eleanor Price?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, my pulse fluttering. "Yes. And you are?" He smiled faintly. "Jonathan Wells. I've been waiting for you." I froze. "Richard's lawyer?" He nodded once. "That's right. Please come in. I think it's time you knew why everything happened the way it did." Inside, the red house glowed with lamplight, warm and amber against the wooden walls. The fireplace crackled softly, and the faint scent of cinnamon hung in the air. Part of me wanted to run, but my feet carried me forward. The door closed behind me with a quiet click, and in that moment I knew. From here on, there would be no turning back. I stepped into the red house, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim amber light. The interior was simple. A wooden table, a few thick notebooks stacked neatly, and an old map of the Maine coastline pinned to the wall. The smell of burning wood mixed with cinnamon filled the air, warm and comforting, even as the wind hissed through the cracks outside. Jonathan Wells motioned for me to sit. He placed a small wooden box on the table, its brass latch aged and tarnished. "Before I open this," he said, his deep voice steady but solemn, "you should know that Richard prepared for this situation a long time ago." I clasped my hands together. "What situation?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, eyes heavy with a mix of sympathy and weight. "Melissa," he said softly, "and the house." The sound of her name froze the air around us. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin envelope. "Richard left me the final updated version of his will, with strict instructions to hand it to you only when you were ready to face the truth." My throat tightened. I nodded slowly. "Please, go on." He opened the envelope and unfolded a printed document. Richard's signature, bold and familiar, rested at the bottom. Under the flickering light of the oil lamp, I read each word, and each one cut deeper than the last. "I, Richard Price, leave all my assets to my wife, Eleanor Price, except for the education fund reserved for our daughter, Melissa Price. The house by the sea, along with the land it stands on, is not to be sold, mortgaged or transferred while Eleanor is alive. I read it again. Twice. 3 times. My heart pounded, then slowed. So, Melissa couldn't have sold the house, I whispered. She had no right. Jonathan nodded. Legally, yes, but Richard was worried that after his passing, Melissa might be influenced or pressured. He suspected someone. I looked up sharply. Who? Her fiancé, Jonathan said quietly. David Collins. David? I repeated, stunned. But he's an engineer, polite, responsible, charming. On the surface, yes, Jonathan said, his tone measured. But Richard discovered that David was in serious debt. Some from failed investments, the rest from gambling. He feared that David would eventually manipulate Melissa, or worse. I sat frozen, the words pricking through the fragile calm I'd been holding on to. Richard never told me, I whispered. I had no idea. Jonathan placed his hand on the box. And this, he said gently, is the rest of the story. He unlatched the box. Inside was a worn leather journal, its edges frayed, with several folded papers tucked between the pages. Richard documented everything here, Jonathan said. He knew one day you'd need to read it. I opened the journal. The paper smelled faintly of salt and age. The handwriting was unmistakably his, steady, thoughtful. Our Melissa is changing. She's not the same little girl who once sat on my shoulders to watch the waves. I don't blame her, but I worry. Someone has made her believe that money is the only way to feel loved. If you're reading this, Ellie, remember, don't be angry with her. Save her. I stopped there, eyes stinging. Don't be angry. Save her. I repeated it silently, like a prayer. Jonathan watched me quietly. Richard was a practical man, he said. He didn't just leave you words. He left you a plan. I looked up. What kind of plan? He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. He bought all the land behind your house and transferred ownership into a trust, under your name. That means even if the house was sold, the land behind it still legally belongs to you. And if there's a dispute, you can file a claim to reclaim the entire property. I stared at him, stunned. He thought that far ahead? Jonathan nodded. Richard always did. He once told me, if I can't protect Ellie with my breath, I'll protect her with the law. A tear rolled down the back of my hand. I held the journal tighter. I don't know whether to feel grateful or heartbroken. Jonathan's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. Eleanor, Richard didn't write these words so you'd live in the past. He wanted you to rise. Melissa isn't that little girl anymore, but she's not lost forever. You can still bring her back. I took a slow breath. Something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Not anger, not grief, but a quiet, deliberate resolve. I thought of Melissa, the tremor in her voice during that phone call, the way she avoided my eyes, the way she changed the subject whenever I mentioned David. Jonathan, I said softly, if I take this to court, can I really get the house back? He nodded. Yes, but you'll have to move fast. I'll help you. And I believe that if you see this through, you won't just reclaim the house, you'll reclaim your daughter too. Outside, the fog had thickened. Wind whistled against the windows, but inside me, the fear was gone. It had been replaced by something stronger. Clarity. I was no longer the woman who watched her life be sold away. Richard had left me more than a legacy. He'd left me the strength to fight. I closed the journal and looked up at Jonathan. Help me, I said firmly. I'm ready to begin. The next morning, the coastal town was wrapped in a thick, white fog. I drove slowly down the familiar road toward home. In my bag were Richard's leather journal, the 2 envelopes, and the copy of his will that Jonathan had given me. Each item felt heavy in my hands, like carrying the weight of a life. But strangely, I didn't feel weak. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt clear. When I reached the gate, a black SUV was parked in front of the house. The door opened and Melissa stepped out. Her brown hair was tied up hastily, her face thinner than I remembered. Beside her stood David, leather jacket, cold eyes, distance between them like a silent confession. I got out of the car, keys clutched tightly in my hand. "Melissa?" I called, my voice calmer than I expected. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon." She froze, eyes widening. "Mom? What are you doing here? I thought you'd already left." I gave a faint smile. And why would I leave? This is my home. David cut in, his tone flat. Mrs. Price, the sale's already finalized. Everything was done legally." I met his gaze. Legally? You sure about that? He hesitated, just a flicker, but I saw it, worry. I turned to my daughter. "Melissa, what did you do? I want to hear it from you." She bit her lip. I just thought we couldn't afford to keep the house anymore. David said if we sold it, you could move somewhere easier, start over. You've been so lonely, Mom. I just wanted you to have a new beginning. I let out a soft, heavy laugh. A new beginning, or the end of everything your father built. Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, David cut her off sharply. "Melissa, stop talking. It's done. She can't change anything now." I looked at him, my tone hardening. "You're wrong, David. I have a copy of Richard's will, the trust papers, and the property ownership documents he left behind. And I have a lawyer, Jonathan Wells." His face drained of color. "What?" "That's right," I said evenly. "Jonathan is already reopening the case, and if there's any sign of fraud in this sale, the one standing in court won't be me." Melissa turned to him, panic flooding her voice. "You said everything was legal." David stepped back, stammering. I thought—" "You didn't think," I interrupted. "You calculated. You knew exactly what this house was worth, and you assumed an old widow wouldn't have the strength to fight back." The air between us was taut, sharp as glass. Melissa covered her face, sobbing. "Mom, stop! I don't want to hear this!" I softened, stepping closer. "Neither do I, sweetheart. But you need to understand. This isn't just a house. This is where your father took his last breath. It's where you grew up. Every brick here carries his touch. And you sold it to someone you barely knew." She broke down, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, Mom. I just wanted to get away from all the memories. Every time I looked at this place, I saw him, the hospital, the loss. I couldn't bear it." I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know, pain makes us run, Melissa, but running doesn't erase the past. It just steals what's still good and worth keeping." David straightened, trying to sound composed. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this emotional nonsense." I met his gaze, cold and steady. "No, you don't. But you should start thinking about your legal obligations, because what you did, coercing Melissa into signing property papers she had no authority over, is family asset fraud." His face went pale. "You can't prove that." I smiled thinly. "That's why I have a lawyer." Melissa looked up at me, eyes red and raw. "Mom, are you really going to take David to court?" I nodded slowly. "I'm not suing him for money, honey. I'm doing this to take back what belongs to our family and to help you understand its worth." She broke into tears again and threw her arms around me. I'm so sorry, Mom. I was stupid. I let him control me. I was just so afraid of losing him, of losing someone else. I held her tight. I've been afraid too. When your father died, I thought my world ended, but I learned something. Love doesn't die when people leave. It dies when we stop protecting it. David glared at us, jaw tight. You won't ruin my plans, Mrs. Price. I released Melissa and stood tall. You already ruined them yourself, David. And when the law steps in, my daughter and I will no longer be your victims. He took a step back, eyes hard, then turned sharply and stormed toward the SUV. The engine roared and the car disappeared into the fog. In the yard, only Melissa and I remained. The ocean wind swept through, carrying salt and cold, but also something cleaner like release. Melissa's voice trembled. What do I do now, Mom? I squeezed her hand. We start over, together, and we'll never let anyone take this place from us again. We stood there, silent, gazing at the old house. Morning light broke through the fog, spilling across the windows where the family photo still hung. And in that quiet moment, I heard Richard's voice in the wind, low, calm, proud. Ellie, you did it. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely, because for the first time in months, I felt warmth returning to this home, not from the fire, but from the life still left in it. 3 weeks later, the Maine sky was crystal clear, cold, bright, endless. I stood before the York County Courthouse, an old brick building with moss-covered gray tiles and a view of the ocean stretching beyond. The sea wind was sharp, carrying the taste of salt and the cries of gulls. Beside me stood Jonathan, immaculate in his gray suit, a thick folder in his hands. Are you sure, Eleanor? He asked quietly. I nodded. I'm sure. There's no turning back now. I looked up at the stone steps leading into the courthouse, each one feeling like a step into my own past, heavy and light all at once. Richard once told me, justice isn't about winning, Ellie. It's how we reclaim the parts of ourselves we've lost. Today, I finally understood what he meant. Inside, the courtroom was cold and solemn. Across the aisle sat David, beside his lawyer, a young man with slicked hair and eyes like glass. Melissa was there, too, sitting quietly in the back row, her face drawn and pale. The judge entered, voice firm and steady. The court will now hear the case of Price versus Collins and Blue Haven Realty. Jonathan rose, his tone calm but resonant. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Eleanor Price, is the rightful owner of the property known as Ocean View, Maine. The sale of this property was carried out illegally, as her daughter was coerced into signing under the influence of the defendant, David Collins. The opposing lawyer stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. There is no evidence of coercion. Ms. Melissa Price signed of her own free will. Jonathan didn't flinch. We do have evidence, and not just words. He opened the folder, pulling out copies of Richard's will and the original ownership documents. The room fell silent as the judge read them. Each line landed heavy, unshakable truth carved into paper. The house could not be sold while Eleanor Price was still alive. David's forehead began to glisten with sweat. His lawyer straightened his tie, forcing composure. Your Honor, my client had no way of knowing this clause existed. Jonathan's reply was cool and measured. Incorrect. He knew, because he was the one who contacted the notary office and requested a forged power of attorney. He placed another document on the table. This is an email exchange between Mr. Collins and a Blue Haven employee, retrieved from the company's server, dated 2 days after Mr. Richard Price's funeral. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. David dropped his gaze, fingers clenching into fists. The judge looked up, eyes cold. Mr. Collins, do you have anything to say for yourself? David inhaled shakily, then lifted his head, eyes red. I only wanted to help Melissa. I needed money to pay my debts, but I didn't mean to deceive anyone. I looked at him, voice low but steady. You didn't mean to deceive, but you did. You didn't just take money, David. You took my daughter's trust. Melissa broke down, burying her face in her hands. The judge struck his gavel once, sharp and commanding. Minutes passed before his voice filled the silence again. This court hereby declares the sale contract null and void due to unlawful authorization. Full ownership of the Ocean View property is restored to Mrs. Eleanor Price. For a moment, the world went still. Only the sound of the wind against the glass remained, and a lightness rising in my chest. Jonathan turned to me with a soft smile. We did it, Eleanor. I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sorrow. Somewhere, I knew Richard was smiling too. After the hearing, Melissa came to me, her voice trembling. Mom, I don't even know what to say. I touched her cheek gently. You don't have to say anything. Just don't let anyone make you forget who you are again. Her tears fell freely. I was so afraid you'd hate me forever. I shook my head. No, sweetheart.
I never hated you. I only hurt because you stopped believing in the love you already had. Jonathan approached, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I'll handle the paperwork, he said with a warm smile. You two should go home. That house deserves to live again. Melissa and I walked out together. The sky had deepened into gold, the sun sinking gently over the ocean. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the cold, briny air, feeling, for the first time in years, completely free. Melissa took my hand. Mom, I want to go home. I want to fix every room. Dad would like that, wouldn't he? I smiled. Your father always believed that everything can fall apart, except love. She leaned her head on my shoulder, silent. The wind swept our hair and the fading sunlight touched her face. For a heartbeat, I saw Richard again, kind eyes, quiet smile, the glow of faith. Jonathan passed by, murmuring with a small nod. Eleanor, today you didn't just win a case. You won back the years you spent in silence. I smiled faintly. Silence was all I knew for a long time, but now I think I'd like to live a little louder, for myself. The three of us left the courthouse together. The Maine sky turned violet as the clouds drifted slow and soft. Out on the water, waves lapped gently, like the heartbeat of memory itself. As our car followed the coastal road, I looked back once more at the old courthouse, the place where justice had finally spoken. And I thought, sometimes a courtroom doesn't just judge people. It judges the fears we've carried too long. And today, I had finally set mine free. The first morning after the trial, soft golden sunlight spilled across the coast of Maine. I woke early to the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs, a sound both strange and achingly familiar. The house still carried its old scent, damp wood, salt, and dust. But today, it didn't feel empty anymore. Melissa was asleep on the sofa, wrapped in Richard's old knitted blanket. I stood there for a moment, watching her, her eyes gently closed, her face calmer than it had been in weeks. And I realized, maybe for the first time in years, that I could look at my daughter without feeling the gulf of years between us. As the sun rose higher, I started making coffee. The smell filled the house, mingling with the morning scent of the sea. Melissa stirred, blinked, then smiled sleepily. You still have that old coffee maker? I thought you threw it away. I smiled. Your father picked it out. I could never get rid of it. She sat up, brushing her hair from her face, a trace of sadness passing through her eyes. When I was little, I hated the smell of coffee.
Dad would make it early in the morning and the whole house would smell like it. I used to hide in my room because I thought that smell meant another long day ahead. But now I miss it. I looked at her, my heart tightening. Your father always got up before sunrise. He used to say, "Every day is worth living if you're brave enough to open the door and face it." We sat in silence for a long while. The clock ticked softly, counting the years we'd lost. After breakfast, I opened Richard's study. Dust covered the desk, the books, and the photograph of him and Melissa when she was little. Melissa stood behind me, her voice low. I remember when Dad taught me how to sail. He was so patient it almost drove him crazy. I dropped the oar 3 times, and he just laughed. I turned to her. That was the last time we went sailing together. After that, he started coughing more. She lowered her head. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't make it back in time when he passed. I was in New York in a meeting, and I thought I had a few more days. I stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. I was angry for a long time, Melissa. But now I understand. You weren't avoiding him. You were avoiding the pain. Her eyes shimmered. Do you think I can still make things right? I smiled softly. No one can change the past, sweetheart, but we can make peace with it. That afternoon, we began to clean the house together. I wiped the dust from every frame while Melissa scrubbed the floors and pulled open the curtains to let the sunlight in. The golden light spilled through the windows, landing on a photo of Richard, smiling wide beside his small sailboat. Melissa stared at it for a long moment. I've never seen him look that happy. I nodded. He was happiest when he was with us. You were his greatest pride. She gave a small, rueful smile. And yet, I made you go to court because of me. I shook my head gently. No, my dear, you reminded me why I'm still here. Before all this, I was just existing, living in memories. But now, I'm living again. She wrapped her arms around me. I'm scared, Mom. Scared of what people will think. Scared that Dad would be disappointed. I whispered, disappointment doesn't come from mistakes, Melissa. It comes when we stop trying. We both laughed softly, a kind of laughter that sounded like something inside us finally breaking free. By late afternoon, Melissa walked down to the shore behind the house. I followed, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. We sat on the familiar rock where Richard used to fish. The sea was calm, the waves gentle, sunlight glimmering gold across the water. Dad used to sit here for hours just listening to the waves, Melissa murmured. I never understood why he liked silence so much. I smiled. He said silence was when you hear yourself most clearly. She gazed at the horizon, her voice low. I don't think I ever really listened to myself, Mom. I just kept chasing what I thought would make me safe. I reached over and touched her hand. Everyone has a moment when they wake up, Melissa. You just had yours. She turned to me, her eyes clearer, softer. I want to stay here for a while. Help you fix the house, tend the garden, and maybe find a way to give something back to Dad. Tears pricked my eyes as I smiled. The only thing your father ever wanted was to see you happy. If you stay, this house will truly live again. Above us, the gulls circled and called. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. Do you think Dad can hear us? I looked out at the waves and said softly, I think he can, because every time the sea wind passes, I feel him smiling. We sat there in silence, letting the ocean tell the rest of the story. The breeze ran through our hair, carrying the scent of salt and seagrass. For the first time in years, my heart held no anger, no regret, only gratitude for what we still had and for memories strong enough to heal. As the sky began to dim, I looked at my daughter and took her hand. Melissa, the cracks in our past aren't meant to be hidden. They're where the light comes through. She smiled through her tears and nodded, and I think the light's finally coming back to us, Mom. Spring in Maine came slowly, but when it did, it bloomed like a promise. The branches outside the porch began to sprout, and tiny white plum blossoms dotted the fence line. The seaside house I once thought was lost was alive again, corner by corner, laugh by laugh. Melissa and I worked side by side to restore everything. The rotted wooden walls were replaced, the roof was reshingled, but the old window frames? I kept them, just cleaned off the dust so sunlight could pour through once more. Each morning the house greeted the sun as if it had never known those gray, silent months. Neighbors began to stop by to help. Old George, the carpenter who lived 3 houses down, showed up with his toolbox and said in his rough coastal voice, "Richard helped me fix my boat once. Guess it's my turn to repay him." I smiled, feeling a quiet warmth bloom inside me. People here might not talk much, but each of them remembered my husband in their own quiet way. Melissa painted a wooden sign and hung it at the gate. It read, "The Lighthouse." I looked at it, surprised. "You came up with that name?" She nodded, eyes glimmering. "I want our home to be more than just a place to live. I want it to be where people can find hope. Like Dad used to say, light only means something when it's shared." I ran my fingers over the letters, and it felt like my heart found an old rhythm again. "Richard, do you see? Our daughter has come home, stronger, kinder." In the weeks that followed, we began hosting little weekend gatherings for the neighborhood kids. Melissa taught them how to paint, and I taught them how to bake butter cookies, Richard's favorite. Laughter filled the yard, mingling with the crash of waves and the smell of warm sugar. A curly-haired boy once asked, "Mrs. Price, why do you call your house the lighthouse?" I smiled and crouched down beside him. "Because the light here doesn't just come from the sun. It comes from people like you who know how to love." He nodded seriously, then grinned. "I'll tell my mom to come visit too." Melissa stood behind me, eyes full of pride. Later that day, she whispered, "I've never seen you smile so much, Mom." I answered softly, "And I've never seen you so close to life." That evening, after everyone left, we sat on the porch watching the sunset stretch across the ocean. "Melissa," I asked, "have you ever thought about leaving again?" She shook her head gently. "No. For the first time, I feel like I belong somewhere." I smiled. "Your father's probably laughing somewhere, watching the 2 of us stumble our way into living again." We both laughed, tears mingling with the sound of the sea. One night, as I was reading through Richard's old leather notebook, Melissa came in holding a small envelope. "This came to the house today. Must have been delivered by mistake," she said, placing it on the table. On the front, in neat handwriting, "To Mrs. Eleanor Price, about an unfinished dream." Inside was a letter from Jonathan Wells. "Dear Eleanor, I've completed the legal process to turn the land behind your house into a small conservation area, according to Richard's wishes. He wanted it to be a place where people could come, breathe, and remember that life, no matter how much it hurts, is still worth living. We're naming it the Richard Price Memorial Garden. Congratulations. He's still protecting you in a very beautiful way." My hand trembled as I set the letter down, tears blurring the words. Melissa took my hand and whispered, "Mom." Dad never really left us, did he? I shook my head, smiling through the tears. No, sweetheart. People we truly love never disappear. They just change shape into the light we see every day. A few days later, we walked out to the land behind the house. Wild grass grew thick, but the air carried the scent of salt and new sap. Melissa planted a small wooden sign into the earth. It read, "The Richard Price Memorial Garden, where what was lost can bloom again." I stood still, my heart trembling in the morning light, and in that glow, I could almost feel Richard beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his voice low and sure. "Ellie, I told you, light always finds its way home." I smiled, and the tears that fell no longer tasted of grief, only peace, the kind that comes when the sea wind embraces all of Maine, soft and vast. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Melissa turned to me and whispered, "Mom, we rebuilt this house with wood, but I think what really keeps it standing is love." I nodded, my voice breaking softly, "And forgiveness, my dear. Forgiveness for others and for ourselves." We stood there together, looking out at the quiet sea. Seagulls wheeled above us, the waves lapping gently against the shore. The day's last light passed through the windows, landing on the family photograph resting on the table, and I knew then the house had finally returned to its true name, the House of Light. Summer in Maine was so radiant it made people forget the long, frozen winters that came before it. The sea shimmered in clear sapphire blue. The sky stretched endlessly high, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers mingled with fresh grass. Today was the opening of the Richard Price Memorial Garden. The garden built from the patch of land behind the house, once nothing but weeds and silence. I stood on the porch in a cream linen dress, holding a small bouquet of lavender, the kind Richard once planted by the fence. Before me gathered neighbors, friends, and children from the village, bringing cakes, flowers, and handwritten notes of congratulations. Jonathan was there too, dressed in a navy suit, his face softer than usual. He approached and said quietly, "Eleanor, Richard would be so proud. You've turned this place into what he always dreamed it could be." I smiled, my eyes glistening. "No, Jonathan, I only continued the dream he began, and now it doesn't belong to just me anymore." Across the yard, Melissa was helping the children hang small flags along the fence. She laughed, her hair catching the wind, sunlight glowing across her face. Watching her, I suddenly saw the little girl she once was, the 8-year-old who used to chase Richard around the yard, shouting with joy as the sailboat set off to sea. Jonathan spoke softly beside me, his voice warm. "Do you see now, Eleanor? The light always finds its way back, even if it has to travel through pain to do it." I nodded. "You're right. Sometimes pain is the only road that leads us back to love." At 10 o'clock, everyone gathered around the new wooden sign, carved with the words, "The Richard Price Memorial Garden, where what was lost can bloom again." Melissa came to my side, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom, will you cut the ribbon?" I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. This was your father's dream, and you're the one who made it real. You should do it." She hesitated, then nodded. Taking a deep breath, she raised the scissors and snipped the thin white ribbon. Applause burst around us. Petals fluttered through the air as the breeze carried the scent of lavender, as if Richard himself were walking among us, smiling in the sunlight. Melissa turned and hugged me tightly. "Mom, we did it!" I whispered. "Not just did it. We healed." All morning, people wandered through the garden. Rows of purple lavender stretched out in waves, with a stone path winding between them, leading to a small wooden bench facing the sea. On the bench was a plaque that read, "For those who believe that love is the only way to live." I sat down for a moment, letting the sounds wash over me. Children's laughter, the rustle of wind through the leaves, the rhythm of the waves in the distance. It all blended together like music. Jonathan came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've created something more beautiful than justice, Eleanor," he said softly. "You've created a legacy." I looked out at the ocean and whispered, "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's the way we make others live better because we once existed." He nodded, eyes shining. "Richard always believed you'd understand that." Near noon, a strong gust of wind swept across the garden. A small piece of paper fluttered toward me, landing by my feet. I bent down and picked it up. It was an old letter from Richard, edges worn, probably blown loose from his old notebook. It contained just one line. "If one day you stand in the sunlight, know that I'm there, in every breath of wind, in every beat of your heart." I smiled as tears slipped down my cheeks. There was no more pain, only the quiet certainty of being loved in the gentlest way possible. Melissa came and sat beside me. "Mom," she said softly, "I got an offer from a nonprofit in Portland. They want me to lead art therapy classes for orphaned kids. I think I'll take it." I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. "You'll be carrying the light of this house to more places than I ever could." She held my hand. "Mom, if Dad were here, what do you think he'd say?" I smiled faintly. "He'd say that sometimes the brightest light is born from the deepest cracks." As evening settled, after everyone had gone, Melissa and I stood together by the garden. The sunset bathed the sea in gold. "Do you hear it, Melissa?" I whispered. "The wind. It sounds like your father's voice." She closed her eyes, smiling. "I hear it. He's laughing, Mom." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, and together we stood, letting the wind move through us, the light pour over our hair, and the past and present merge into one. No more judgment, no more fear, only peace. The quiet peace of two souls who had walked through the dark and found their own light. Before going back inside, I turned for one last look at the garden. A soft breeze passed, making the lavender bough gracefully, and in that moment I whispered, to myself and to the man who had never truly left, "Thank you, Richard, for teaching me that real love doesn't need to win. It only needs to endure." And I knew then, from that day forward, every sunrise in Maine would bear his name. An early autumn morning in Maine. Sunlight streamed through the window, touching the framed letters Richard had left on the wall. I poured a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise, filling the kitchen with warmth and the scent of roasted beans. Outside, the memory garden was in full bloom. The lavender bushes swayed gently in the breeze, and children ran between them as if this had always been their home. Melissa was packing her bags, ready to leave for Portland and begin her new job at the Art Therapy Center. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, holding my cup. She nodded, eyes bright. "I think Dad would want me to do this, to help people find themselves again through art. Just like you helped me." I looked at her, pride and a quiet ache rising together in my chest. "Maine will miss you," I said softly. She smiled, stepped forward, and hugged me. "Maine will never lose me, Mom. I'm just going out there to plant seeds." That sentence stayed with me the entire day. Planting seeds. Maybe it was time for me to do the same. Not in the soil, but in the hearts of others. That afternoon, while sorting through an old bookshelf, I found one of my old journals. The leather cover was worn, the title still faintly legible. "What I learned when I thought it was too late." I flipped through a few pages, scattered notes, fears, regrets, and questions that never found their answers. And then an idea sparked. If I had survived my loss, Maybe I could help others do the same. That evening, I turned on my old computer and typed out a short post on the town's community board. My name is Eleanor Price. I live by the coast of Cape Elizabeth. I'm starting a small group for older women, a place to share about loss, new beginnings, and finding trust again. No experience needed. Just bring your heart. I clicked post, then sat still for a long moment, watching the screen glow. I didn't know if anyone would read it or care, but for the first time in a long while, I felt I was doing something right. A week later, I received 8 replies. 8 women, 8 stories. One had divorced after 40 years of marriage. Another had lost her son in an accident. One lived alone in a house too big for her silence. As I read their words, I saw fragments of my old self, lost, afraid, but carrying a flicker of light that refused to die. The first meeting took place in my seaside home. I brewed mint tea, baked scones, and placed a small vase of lavender in the center of the table. They came, shy and hesitant, like birds searching for shelter. I smiled and welcomed each of them. No stories, no labels, just presence. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "I don't know where this will lead us, but I do know that sometimes simply sitting together is already a beginning." Margaret, the first woman to speak, with silver hair and weary eyes, said quietly, "Mrs. Price, I don't think I can start over. I feel like a tree that's already past its season to bloom." I took her hand. "There are no trees without seasons, Margaret. Some just bloom quietly, waiting for the right eyes to see them." The room fell silent. Then someone smiled. Someone wiped away tears, and I knew the first seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, our group, Seeds of Faith, began to grow. We shared stories, we read poetry, we planted herbs in small pots, we wrote letters to those we had lost. Each woman left with eyes a little brighter, smiles a little truer. One afternoon, after a meeting, Margaret handed me a card. On it was written, "Eleanor, you didn't just help me believe in life again, you helped me believe in myself." I hugged her, my voice breaking. "No, Margaret, you did that yourself. I only brought the light. You were the one who opened the door." When everyone had gone, I stepped out onto the porch. The night sea shimmered under a silver moon. I whispered, "Richard, can you see this?" We've planted our seeds. A soft gust of wind brushed past, rustling the lavender by the steps, and in that wind, I could almost hear his voice, calm, warm, familiar. "I see it, Ellie, and I'm proud of you." I closed my eyes, letting the wind wrap around me, feeling life pulse in every heartbeat. There was no fear anymore, only faith. Faith that no matter how deep the loss, everyone can bloom again. Before going back inside, I wrote the final line in my old journal. "Seeds of faith don't need soil. They only need a heart willing to open." Then I turned off the lights, leaving the moonlight to shimmer across the wall where the letters hung. Those 5 letters were no longer memories. They had become a lighthouse, guiding me and others through the dark toward ourselves. And in that quiet silver moment, I finally understood. Love, when shared, never disappears. It simply turns into seeds, carried by the wind, taking root, and becoming faith for those who come after. Winter had begun to touch Maine. The sea wind blew stronger now, waves crashing against the rocky cliffs like the beating of a distant drum. Down the path to my house, snow had started to gather on the steps, a thin, soft layer of white. Inside the living room, though, warmth lingered. The Seeds of Faith group still met every week, faithfully, no matter the weather. We were no longer just a group for conversation. We had become a small community, a place where women who had once been broken learned to spread their wings again. Margaret had begun learning the piano, though her hands trembled. Clara, who had lost her husband to cancer, started journaling again every morning. And I told them about Richard, about the letters, and about how love can survive even through loss. That meeting, snow fell thick outside. We sat in a circle by the fireplace, each holding a cup of steaming tea. Outside, the wind howled through the windows, but inside, there was only laughter and the gentle warmth of women rediscovering themselves. Margaret looked at me and asked, "Eleanor, do you know why I still come here every week?" I smiled. "Because you like my scones?" Laughter rippled through the room. She shook her head, eyes shining. "No, because every time I'm here, I feel like I'm sitting inside a lighthouse. The storms are still raging outside, but in here, there's always light." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Her words filled the room and my heart. No other gift could have meant more. 3 days later, I received an email from the local television station. The sender was Laura Bennett, a producer from Maine Voices, a community program. "We've heard about the Seeds of Faith group. Your story and the stories of these women are inspiring so many. We'd love to invite you to share it on our show next week." I read the email again and again, my heart pounding. A part of me was afraid. I wasn't a speaker or anyone special, just an ordinary woman. But then I remembered Richard's third letter. "When you think everything has ended, remember, endings are just beginnings in disguise." I smiled. Maybe this was that beginning. The day of the recording, snowflakes floated through the air like feathers. I wore an ivory knit sweater and the soft wool scarf Melissa had made for me. Laura greeted me at the studio door, her smile warm and genuine. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's an honor to meet you. I lost my mother 2 years ago, and hearing your story made me believe that pain can become something beautiful." I took her hand gently. "Thank you, Laura. Pain doesn't disappear, but we can teach it how to walk beside us." Inside the studio, the lights were a soft golden glow. I sat in a small circle with 5 other women from the group. Margaret, Clara, and 3 others. Laura began the interview. "Mrs. Price, what made you start this group?" I looked around at their faces, then said, "Because I once thought loss was the end. But it turned out it was only the pause before I could hear myself again. I didn't start this group to heal anyone. I just wanted us to sit together, to breathe, to believe." The studio fell completely silent. All eyes turned toward me. Laura asked softly, "Is there something you'd like to say to those struggling with loss right now?" I drew in a deep breath and answered slowly, "Don't try to forget. Remember, but remember with gratitude, not with tears. Because as long as love is remembered, it's still alive." No one spoke. Clara wiped her eyes. Margaret smiled through hers, and I felt, in that warm, quiet light, that Richard was there too, watching, proud, and at peace. After the show, Laura hugged me and whispered, "You've helped more people than you realize, Mrs. Price. You are our lighthouse." I laughed softly, surprised and moved. "No, Laura. I'm just a small lamp. But when many small lamps stand together, they make a sky full of light." A few weeks later, the episode aired. Hundreds of letters, emails, and messages poured in. Women from across the country wrote to me, "Thank you. I've started writing my journal again. I planted a lavender bush for my husband. You don't know me, but your story made me want to live one more day." I read each one with tears in my eyes, not from pride, but from understanding. Healing spreads like light when we're brave enough to share our stories. That evening, I stood on the porch and looked out at the small garden lantern flickering in the cold wind. The flame wavered for a moment, then steadied, quiet,
firm and kind. And I whispered, "Richard, do you see it? The lighthouse is shining now, not just for me, but for every woman who once thought she was lost." The sea breeze brushed my face, carrying the faint scent of lavender, and I knew in that moment that I had entered a new chapter, a chapter of sharing, of light, and of a warmth that would never go out. Ever since the episode aired, my life had changed more than I ever imagined. The mailbox at the end of my path, once filled only with utility bills, was now brimming each morning with white envelopes, colored cards, and small parcels from all over the country. Some came from the sunlit hills of California, others from quiet towns in Texas. One even arrived from a woman in Canada. And nearly all began the same way. I heard your story on Maine Voices. Each morning I sat by the window, opening the envelopes one by one, reading each trembling line. One was written in shaky handwriting from an 80-year-old widow. "My husband passed away in 1999. I stopped talking to anyone after that. But after hearing you speak, I started talking to the lavender bush in my garden. I named it Henry. I laughed and cried at the same time." Another letter from a young woman in Arizona read, "I'm 28. I just got divorced and felt like a failure. But when I heard you talk about beginning again, I realized that an ending doesn't mean nothingness." I folded each letter carefully, tied them together with a ribbon, and placed them in Richard's old wooden box, the one he used to keep stamps in. Each letter felt like a heartbeat, small, fragile, alive, from people learning how to love life again. One afternoon, while reading another stack of letters, my phone rang. Melissa's voice burst through, bright and full of life. "Mom! I just rewatched your interview. Everyone at the Portland Art Center did too. They want you to come speak at the Healing Through Art exhibit. Will you do it?" I smiled, looking out at the lavender garden. "You already know my answer, sweetheart." Melissa laughed. "I thought so. Mom, I'm so proud of you." After hanging up, I sat quietly, feeling warmth bloom in my chest. Not the emptiness of someone left behind, but the fullness of someone who had turned pain into a light for others to follow. A few days later, I received a thicker envelope than usual. The handwriting on the front was neat and careful. From Nora Jenkins, Chicago. Inside was a long handwritten letter and several black and white photographs. "Dear Mrs. Eleanor, I watched your interview from the hospital while waiting for my cancer results. I thought I had nothing left to believe in. But when you said, 'Don't try to forget. Remember with gratitude, not with tears,' I cried. That sentence changed how I saw my life. I started writing letters to people I'd drifted away from, even to my ex-husband. He never replied, but I feel lighter now. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't need to be returned to be complete." I held the letter, hands trembling, not from sadness, but from realization. Those words I'd spoken that day were no longer mine. They had gone far beyond Maine, far beyond my story and Richard's, to reach hundreds, perhaps thousands of hearts. That night, I carried the wooden box of letters out to the porch. The sky was clear, glittering with stars. The ocean wind whispered softly against the railing. I opened the lid and looked down at the stack of envelopes, white upon white, like pressed petals of memory. And in my mind I heard Richard's voice, deep, calm, loving. "Ellie, do you see? Each letter is a seed, and you're the one who helped them bloom." I smiled through tears and whispered back, "You're right, Richard.
But seeds only grow when they find the light. You were my light. And now, I want to send that light farther into the world. The next morning I began to write. I chose a new notebook, lavender-colored, with a simple title on the cover, The Lavender Letters. I wrote the opening lines. This is a collection of stories from those who have learned to love again. Every letter in this book is proof that the heart can heal, if we dare to open it. Day after day, I reread the letters, selecting some to copy by hand, adding small responses of my own. Not advice, just empathy. I understand how you feel. I was afraid once too, but we're still here, and that's the greatest miracle. One afternoon, Margaret came by and saw the piles of paper spread across the table. "What are you working on, Eleanor?" she asked, smiling. I looked up, voice soft as the sea breeze. A book. Not mine. Ours. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "If Richard were here, he'd be so proud." I gazed out at the ocean, returning her smile. I know, and I hope this book will be a light for anyone still lost in the dark. That night, after finishing the first chapter, I set down my pen and whispered, "Thank you for every letter, every story, and every soul brave enough to share its heart with me." I turned off the lamp and stepped out onto the porch. Above me, the full moon poured silver light over the memory garden. The lavender swayed gently, whispering secrets to the wind. And in that soft, fragrant air, I heard it clearly. Love doesn't end with death. It begins again, in every heart willing to share it. Spring came early that year in Maine. Along the winding coastal roads of Cape Elizabeth, the snow melted faster than usual, revealing the damp scent of earth and new grass. In the Richard Price Memory Garden, the lavender bloomed in a sea of purple, while on my desk, the notebook titled The Lavender Letters grew thicker each passing day. After 3 months of writing, revising, and rereading, I finally decided to send the manuscript to a small publishing house in Boston. I didn't expect much, just thought that if these stories could reach a few more hearts, that would already be enough. A week passed, then another. And then one morning, while I was pouring coffee, the phone rang. A calm, confident voice came through the line. "Hello, Mrs. Eleanor Price. This is Clara Hastings from Beacon Press. We've read your manuscript, The Lavender Letters, and we would like to publish it." I froze. "Really?" Clara laughed softly. "Not only publish it, Mrs. Price. We want to share it with the world. Do you know, my editor cried through the entire second chapter." I gripped the phone tightly, my heart swelling. "I don't even know what to say." She replied gently, "Just say yes, because I believe this book will remind people that love still exists, no matter what form it takes." I looked out the window at the lavender swaying in the wind. "All right, Clara," I said, voice trembling. "I say yes." From that moment, life swept me into another new chapter. Editing, choosing cover designs, taking photos, writing the introduction. When they asked what subtitle I wanted beneath the title, I wrote on a slip of paper, "Letters not meant for one person, but for everyone learning to love life again." The day of the book launch arrived. I went to Boston with Melissa by my side. My little girl, now grown, confident, radiant among a crowd of strangers. She held my hand and whispered, "Mom, I'm so proud of you." I think Dad's here too, somewhere in this crowd. I smiled. He's always here, sweetheart, in every word. The event took place in an old bookstore. Brick walls, soft golden lamps, the air rich with the scent of paper and coffee. More than 100 people attended, far more than I ever expected. A young woman approached the signing table, eyes glistening. "Mrs. Price, the chapter letter to myself made me cry all night. You don't know me, but I was about to give up on everything. And then I decided to stay." I squeezed her hand, warmth flowing through my fingertips. "Thank you," I said softly, "for choosing to stay." After the event, a reporter from the local magazine asked, "Mrs. Price, if Richard were alive today, what do you think he'd say?" I paused, then smiled. "He'd say that love never dies, it just changes shape. And sometimes it becomes a book." The next day, that quote appeared in the paper, and within 2 weeks, the Lavender Letters became one of the most talked about books in New England. I could hardly believe it. People posted photos online tagging me with messages like, "My mom read chapter 3 and said, 'She's speaking for me, honey.' I brought this book to the nursing home and we read it together." Then one morning, a formal letter arrived. An invitation from Women's Voices of America, an annual conference in Boston honoring women who had inspired change. "We believe your story, and the Lavender Letters, has touched thousands. We would be honored if you would share your journey at this year's opening session." Tears filled my eyes as I read, not from pride, but from memory. I thought of the Eleanor I once was, the woman who feared opening doors, who hid from her own shadow. Now she was being invited to stand in the light. The night before I left, I sat at my desk and opened a small envelope from Clara. Inside was the first printed copy of the book, still smelling of fresh paper. On the first page she had written by hand, "To Eleanor Price, who taught us that from the ashes of loss, lavender can still bloom." I ran my fingers over the words, as if touching Richard's warmth through the ink. Outside, the night wind stirred, and I heard the faint sound of waves against the shore. I whispered, "Tomorrow I'll tell our story, Richard, not for applause, but so that those drowning in sorrow will know they can rise again." The next morning, I tucked the book into my bag, along with the wool scarf Melissa had knitted, and gently closed the door behind me. Sunlight spilled across the wooden table, illuminating the old wooden box of letters, silent witnesses to the miracle they had begun. I stepped outside, letting the ocean wind kiss my face, breathing in the salt and promise of Maine. In the distance, the road to Boston gleamed beneath the morning sun. And in my heart, there was only one feeling left: gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for having loved, and for being given the chance to tell that love story. That morning, Boston greeted me with a chill wind laced with the scent of sea salt and freshly roasted coffee from a corner cafe. Above, the gray clouds drifted slowly, letting a few pale rays of sunlight slip through the hotel window. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my lavender-colored scarf, the last one Melissa had knitted for me before I left home. In the reflection, I saw a silver-haired woman, eyes lined with age, yet calm and steady. She was no longer the Eleanor who once wept in that dark seaside house in Maine. She was Eleanor Price, author of the Lavender Letters, about to step onto a stage before thousands. The phone rang. Melissa's voice came warm and steady. "Mom, I know you'll do great. Don't be nervous. Just talk like you're talking to me." I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. You know, your voice has always been my compass." "Then let it guide you today," she said softly. "I love you, Mom. From the bottom of my heart, I love you too." After hanging up, I took a deep breath and stepped out of the hotel. The conference venue was a building of glass and wood near the city square. When I arrived, the line of attendees already stretched down the block. Women of all ages, from bright-eyed girls with notebooks to elderly ladies leaning on canes. They had all gathered for one reason: to find hope. A staff member guided me backstage. "Mrs. Price," she whispered, 5 minutes until showtime. When you walk out, they'll introduce you as the woman who turned grief into light for others." I laughed lightly, heart pounding faster. "That sounds far too grand. I just tell stories." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "And sometimes," she said, "telling stories is the most beautiful way to heal." Music began to play. Then the host's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome Mrs. Eleanor Price, author of the Lavender Letters, the woman who showed us that even in loss, love can still bloom." The stage lights flared as I stepped forward. Hundreds of faces turned toward me. For a heartbeat, I felt as though my soul floated, as if Richard were there, somewhere in the crowd, watching me with that familiar, gentle gaze. I paused for a moment, then smiled. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice trembling slightly but clear. "My name is Eleanor Price from a small coastal town in Maine. Years ago, I thought my life had ended when the man I loved passed away. But then something miraculous happened. I realized that we never truly lose those we love. We simply learn how to carry them with us." The hall fell silent. I spoke about Richard, about the letters, about the women from Seeds of Faith, about how old wounds can become gardens when we dare to open our hearts. "We who have once been broken," I said, my voice rising, "don't need to soar high. We only need to fly far enough to find the light. And when we do, our duty is to shine it for someone else." A soft sob came from the front row. A young woman bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I looked at her and said gently, "Don't be afraid of pain, dear. Pain is the truest language of the heart. It doesn't come to destroy us. It comes to open us." Applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling into a great wave. Some people embraced, others wiped their tears, some simply smiled in silence. In that moment, I understood. I was no longer telling my story. I was giving voice to everyone who had ever known loss and dared to rise again. When the talk ended, I bowed. The audience stood, the applause unending. Among them, I saw a familiar face. Jonathan, the lawyer from years ago. He nodded, hand over his heart, a quiet gesture of gratitude. After the crowd dispersed, I lingered in the empty hall. The stage light still glowed faintly across the seats. I whispered, "Richard, do you see?" I did it, not because I was strong, but because I learned how to be tender in the right places. A breeze slipped through the glass doors, stirring the lavender scarf on my shoulders. I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the echo of applause hum softly within me. When I finally stepped outside, the sun had set. Boston's skyline shimmered against the darkening sky, lights reflecting on the Charles River. I stood there, watching the glow stretch like a chain of tiny lighthouses across the water. And I knew I was not alone. There were thousands of women out there, each kindling a light of her own. In the cool night air, I whispered into the wind, "We can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose how to tell the story, with love instead of fear." After the Boston conference, it felt as if a new door had opened in my life. The phone rang constantly, not from journalists, but from people who wanted to do something with me. One morning, while I was watering the lavender on the porch, the phone rang again. "Mrs. Price?" A man's voice came through, calm yet brimming with energy. "I'm Michael Turner, executive director of a nonprofit called Rise Again Women. I watched your speech. Actually, I watched it 3 times. I laughed softly, surprised. 3 times. Didn't you notice how nervous I was?" He chuckled. "You were nervous, yes, but you were real. That's what made people believe you. Our organization would love to help you start a foundation, one inspired by the Lavender Letters, a place where women who've lost their sense of hope can begin again." I froze. Foundation?" "Yes," he said, his tone bright with conviction. It could be a small center, a community house, or even just a home where women can come, talk, and learn how to stand again. We'll handle the legal and financial side, but the heart, the soul, that has to come from you. I looked out toward the sea, where the white-tipped waves rolled endlessly toward the shore. And in that instant, I heard Richard's voice in the wind. Ellie, light was never meant to shine for one person alone. I smiled through tears. I agree, Mr. Turner. Let's do it. And so we began to plan. A month later, in my old house in Cape Elizabeth, the Lavender Foundation was born. A small white cottage with lavender-colored doors and a sign by the gate that read, "The Lavender Foundation, a place to begin again." The opening day was drenched in golden sunlight. Neighbors came carrying flowers, pastries, and stories of their own. Standing on a small wooden stage in the yard, I spoke, my voice trembling slightly, but full of feeling. Today, I'm not just opening a house. I'm opening a doorway. In each of our hearts. Everyone who has known loss, fear, or failure deserves a chance to begin again. And we'll do that, together. Applause filled the air, mingling with quiet tears. Margaret, my dear friend, came forward holding a small pot of lavender. "This is from your own garden, Eleanor," she said. I thought, if one lavender plant can survive a Maine winter, then so can a woman's heart. I hugged her, my eyes wet. Thank you, Margaret. You're living proof of that. Melissa arrived last, carrying a framed painting of her father. In it, Richard stood on a grassy hill overlooking the ocean, surrounded by lavender blooms. She placed it on the main wall and whispered, "Dad should be here to see everyone finding hope again." I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. He is here, sweetheart. Always. In the days that followed, the little house quickly became a haven for women across the state. Some came just to sit in silence. Some came to share their stories. Some brought letters they had never dared to send. We had no rules, just warm tea, soft chairs, and arms that didn't judge. And as I looked at them, I could see it. In every pair of eyes, something was blooming again, faith in themselves. One afternoon, Margaret said thoughtfully, "Eleanor, we should start an art class for the women. Sometimes hearts need to speak, but not in words." I smiled. That's a beautiful idea, and the teacher should be Melissa. A month later, Melissa officially became the art coordinator of the Lavender Foundation. Every week, she led workshops in painting, pottery, and letter-writing therapy. Women came from nearby towns, bringing memories and pain, and left with watercolor-stained hands and quiet smiles. One evening, after everyone had gone, I stood by the door watching Melissa clean up the art tables. "Melissa," I asked softly, "did you ever imagine that from something so painful we could create something this beautiful?" She turned to me, smiling. "I think pain is just the soil, Mom. Love, that's the seed. And you were the first one to plant it." I went still, my heart swelling like the tide. I walked over and embraced her. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "We planted it together." As night fell, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the lavender-colored sign glowing under the warm light. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and lavender, mingling with the distant sound of waves. I whispered into the wind, a prayer more than a thought. "Richard, do you see? Your letters have become a home, a place where those who've been lost can find themselves again." The wind rose, rustling the lavender leaves, and I smiled, feeling his presence, not as a memory, but as something alive, breathing, here. I knew then. The Lavender Foundation was more than our legacy. It was proof that even after the fiercest storm, flowers can still bloom in the hearts of those who choose to love. 3 years passed since the Lavender Foundation first opened its doors, Every spring, the garden outside burst into violet bloom, as if the flowers themselves knew they were guarding something sacred. The once small house had grown into a warm, vibrant community center, where laughter mingled with the soft notes of an old piano, and the scent of jasmine tea lingered through the halls. I still lived in a little upstairs room, the one with the window facing the sea. On my desk sat a neat stack of letters from women across the country, each one a story of healing and rebirth. One morning, as I sorted through the mail, a pale blue envelope caught my eye. The handwriting was shaky, careful. Dear Mrs. Eleanor, I came to the foundation last year when I was pregnant, and my husband had left me. You told me then, one day, this baby will teach you to believe in love again. Today, I'm sending you a photo of my daughter. Her name is Lavender.
Thank you for giving me a reason to live.
I held the letter for a long time, my vision blurring. Not from sadness, but from the realization that love, once planted, could take root anywhere, blooming where we least expect it. That afternoon, I went downstairs and found Melissa in the kitchen with 3 young women. They were baking, laughing, flour dusting their hair and cheeks. Leaning against the doorway, I teased, "What's this? You all opening a bakery without telling me?" A curly-haired woman turned, smiling wide. "Oh no, Mrs. Price. We're just learning how to mix flour and pain evenly." Laughter filled the room. I stepped closer, picked up a wooden spoon and stirred the batter gently. "A little love," I said, "and a little courage. That's the recipe for every cake and every life." The kitchen was full of laughter. Outside, the sunset painted the lavender fields in shades of violet and gold. I realized then that some things don't need to shout to be powerful, like the scent of lavender carried quietly on the wind. That September, I was invited to the University of Maine to speak to the students. The theme was Resilience and the Art of Healing. When I stepped onto the stage, hundreds of young faces looked up, curious and expectant. One student asked, "Mrs. Price, how does someone know they've truly healed?" I smiled. "You'll know," I said, "when you can tell your story without feeling pain. Only gratitude." The hall was silent for a moment, then filled with soft applause. Looking out at those faces, I realized something beautiful. The next generation was learning to turn their pain into wisdom, not burden. When I returned to the foundation, I began to write again. Not letters this time, but stories about them, the women who had once arrived trembling at the door and left with laughter in their eyes. I titled the manuscript Seeds of Light. Melissa came in, carrying a cup of tea. "I bet you're writing late again, aren't you?" she said, smiling. I chuckled. "I just want to leave something behind, for those who'll come after us." She sat beside me, looking at the pages. "Mom, you don't realize it," she said softly. "You've become the story you once dreamed of writing." I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Melissa took my hand. "Back then, you wrote about surviving. Now, you're writing about living fully. That's the real miracle." Her words warmed my heart like sunlight after rain. "You know," I said, "I used to think I was too old to start over. But age doesn't take away your chances. It just gives you time to understand why they matter." That evening, we held our annual Lavender Night, a small celebration for everyone the foundation had helped. They returned with flowers, pastries, and new stories. The walls were covered with hundreds of photos, each one a smile. A young woman stepped onto the stage, her voice trembling as she spoke into the microphone. "I came here 2 years ago after losing my father. I didn't believe I could ever love again. But Mrs. Price taught me that love doesn't always begin between 2 people. Sometimes it begins within yourself." I quietly wiped away tears. Not from emotion alone, but from the realization that my words had become their voices now. That was how one candle lit thousands more. When the night ended, I stepped out into the garden. Hundreds of small candles flickered in the dark, their light dancing in the eyes of those gathered. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and sea breeze. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Richard, do you see? They're carrying forward the story we began." And for a fleeting second, I heard his voice, soft and steady as the tide. "I see, Ellie, and I'm proud of you." I smiled and closed my eyes.
In the glow of candlelight, warmth bloomed in my chest, not from the past, but from the present, alive and radiant, unfolding like a lavender flower under the stars. That autumn, Maine was wrapped in gold, the maples blazing against the silver horizon of the sea. A soft wind carried the scent of salt and damp wood from the old houses along the shore. I sat by my study window, the finished manuscript of Seeds of Light resting before me. The pages were thick with stories, the journeys of dozens of women who had stepped out from the dark into their own morning light. On the cover, I had written a simple dedication. For those who believed they had withered, to remind them that even ashes can shine. Melissa came in carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Have you been working since morning again, Mom?" I smiled. "No, I was just looking back a little. It's finished now, and somehow that feels empty." She sat beside me, her voice gentle. "Maybe when you've given everything inside your heart, you need a little silence to hear yourself again." I nodded. Perhaps. I used to fear silence. It reminded me of what I'd lost. But now I think silence is just another way to say thank you. We sat together, gazing at the sea. Late autumn, the water lay still as glass. After a while, I said softly, "Melissa, I want to go back to our old house in York, where your father and I lived. Just for a day." She looked at me and smiled. "To say goodbye?" I shook my head. "No, to say thank you." 3 days later, we set out. The little car rolled down the coastal road where the pine trees leaned toward the ocean breeze. I lowered the window, letting in the smell of salt and dried lavender. When we arrived, the house was still standing. The paint faded, but the roof intact. The wooden door creaked open, releasing the familiar scent of sea and time. Inside, everything felt suspended. The wicker chair, the wedding photograph, Richard's old desk. I placed my hand on its surface and whispered, "You know, this house was once my fear, then my grief, and now it's where I've learned to forgive." Melissa walked around wiping dust from the frames. "Dad looks so young here," she said softly. "I almost didn't recognize him." I gazed at the photo for a long time. "When you love someone," I told her, "they never grow old. They just turn into light in the memory of the one who stays." We sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sea shimmered. Gulls wheeled freely above the waves, like fragments of old memories set loose. "You know," I said, "I used to think happiness came only once, but it turns out happiness is something you plant, and it returns when you least expect it." Melissa rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom, do you ever think you'll write again?" I laughed. "Of course, but next time, something shorter, lighter. Maybe for children, so they'll learn that sadness isn't something to hide from." She smiled. "That would be a wonderful book." Dusk deepened, tinting the sky the color of late lavender. Closed my eyes and let the wind brush through my hair. In that still moment, I understood. Life never gives back what we've lost, but it gives us the chance to turn loss into legacy. That night, in the old house, I opened my worn journal
and wrote one final line. Richard, thank you for loving me in a way that made me never stop loving life. I folded the notebook, placed it on the desk, and blew out the candle. The next morning, when the grass was still jeweled with dew, Melissa and I walked to the beach. The sun was rising, casting the water in hues of gold and rose. From my coat pocket, I took out a small glass vial filled with dried lavender. Your father loved this scent most, I said, opening the lid and letting the wind take it. The petals spiraled into the air, catching the sunlight as they drifted away. Melissa squeezed my hand. Mom, look. They're like tiny lights flying. I smiled. Yes, that's how love returns. Not in form, but in light. We stood there in silence, listening to the sea, and our hearts beating in time with it. Before leaving, I turned back to look at the house one last time. The morning light streamed through the window, falling across Richard's photograph. It looked like a farewell, or perhaps a promise. See you again. On the drive home, I rolled down the window, letting the warm, salty air fill the car. I thought of it all. The tears, the laughter, the people who had found one another in that little, lavender-colored house. And I understood then, when a person can tell their story with love instead of regret, that's when they are truly free. I placed my hand over my heart, feeling its rhythm merge with the rhythm of the sea, and whispered, in the end, life doesn't ask us for greatness. It only asks that we leave a little light and a garden where others can bloom. Many years have passed since the day Melissa and I returned to the old house in York. I am over 80 now. My hair has turned white. My hands tremble slightly. But every morning, I still brew a cup of lavender tea and step out onto the porch. In the distance, the sea remains as blue as ever, and the wind still carries the scent of salt mingled with lavender's quiet sweetness. The Lavender Foundation is no longer a little cottage. It has become a thriving center with branches across the state. Every spring, hundreds of women gather, bringing with them their stories and the belief that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always light waiting at the end of the road. I no longer run it directly, but Melissa and her young, passionate team call me every week. They tell me about the newcomers, the art workshops, the healing letter sessions, and the babies born from love restored. One afternoon, I received a video from the foundation. Hundreds of women stood in the lavender garden, each holding a letter. The camera panned slowly and stopped at a new wooden sign in the middle of the field. It read, "The Eleanor Price Garden, where stories are told in light." Tears welled in my eyes, not from pride, but from knowing that every seed I had once planted had truly taken root. That evening, Melissa came to visit. She was in her 50s now, yet to me, she was still the little girl with curly hair running barefoot through the yard. We sat side by side under the warm glow of the lamp, surrounded by old photographs. "Mom," she said, "they want to rename the main hall at the foundation after you. What do you think?" I chuckled softly. "There's no need, sweetheart. My name means nothing if it's just hanging on a wall. What matters is that everyone who walks through that door feels they are worthy of love." Melissa smiled, squeezing my hand. "You've never changed, have you?" I shook my head gently. "Oh, I've changed a lot. Once I only knew how to love one person. Now I've learned how to love the whole world and still keep the same heart." We sat quietly for a while. The clock ticked slowly, the heartbeat of the house. Then Melissa said softly, "Mom, the foundation is celebrating its 10th anniversary next week. I want you to come, just so everyone can see that the first lavender bloom is still alive." I laughed, but something tender rose inside me. I knew my strength was fading, yet the thought of seeing it all again filled my heart with warmth. On the day of the celebration, the foundation shimmered with light. I sat in the front row, watching young, confident women take the stage to share their stories. One woman said, "I read the Lavender letters when I was in a psychiatric hospital. Now I'm studying for my master's in psychology, to help others the way Mrs. Price helped me." Applause thundered through the hall. I could feel every beat of my heart, slow, steady, peaceful. After the program, Melissa guided me to the garden. The night air was soft, fragrant with lavender. Tiny lights lined the pathway like 1,000 fallen stars. "Do you remember," I said, "your father once told us that if a person can make someone believe in goodness, they've lived a life worth living." Melissa nodded, her eyes glistening. "And you've made thousands believe." I looked around, at the smiles, the laughter, the glow of the lights, and in that moment I felt Richard everywhere. In every lamp, every petal, every breath of wind. I whispered, almost to myself, "Thank you for starting the story I got to continue." The breeze stirred gently, and I thought I heard his voice, warm and teasing as ever. "I never left, Ellie. I just changed my seat so I could see you better." I lifted my eyes to the sky, a sea of stars gleaming above us. A calm so deep filled me. It was as if the whole world was breathing with me. The next morning, I sat by the window and wrote the final line in my new journal. "When I am no longer here, let the lavender tell my story. That love never dies. It simply changes form, from one heart to another." I set the pen down and closed the book. Outside, the lavender was in full bloom, glowing violet under the early sun. A few petals lifted in the breeze, but instead of falling, they floated, circling softly, as if searching for a new place to begin. I smiled, closed my eyes, and breathed in that familiar fragrance. In that quiet, golden moment, I knew I had left enough. A garden, a legacy, and a story that others would continue in their own light. Some wounds leave no scars. They leave light. Like Eleanor Price, she turned loss into love, and that love still blooms in the hearts of others. If this story touched you, write in the comments, what are you grateful for today? Because sometimes, one small word is enough to make someone believe in tomorrow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this light with someone you love.